Hello, and welcome to Sonata She Wrote. Today we'll be discussing the 9th song in Schubert's cycle Winterreise, Irrlicht, or Will-O-The-Wisp. In this song, the wanderer follows a will-o'-the-wisp into rocky chasms with no clear way out. He attempts bravado at being lost, and eventually succumbs to a recognition of his fate. As all rivers reach the sea, so will he reach his destiny. But first, what is an Irrlicht? An Irrlicht, in English called a will-o'-the-wisp or sometimes a jack-o'-lantern, an Irrlicht is a rare phenomenon in which a light or burst of flame is seen above peat bogs or marshes. In the early modern era, when marshland was still fairly common in Europe, they were seen often, or at least more often than nowadays, and had the reputation of leading travelers astray due to their similarity with flickering lamps. Blake Howe, writing in the Cambridge Companion to Schubert's Winterreise, notes that although at the time these were viewed by some as supernatural, they have a more mundane explanation. A stew of decaying organic material can release gases, methane and phosphine, and in the right amounts, the gases spontaneously combust with oxygen. The combustion produces a green flame. But this mystery is far from solved. Why did 18th and 19th century reports describe differently colored flames? Blue, red, and yellow, but not green. Further, phosphine and methane produce an intensely bright, smoky fire, quite different from the pale, odorless light of early accounts. Unfortunately, the phenomenon has become all but extinct, possibly because many European marshes were drained in the late 19th and 20th centuries for farmland and suburban development. Today, scientists must recreate the fire in their laboratories, albeit in an atmosphere very different from a stewy, sludgy bog. Schubert and Muller, however, are of course calling upon the supernatural associations of the Irrlicht, which is musically represented by the falling perfect fourths of the first two bars.
Tiefsten Felsengründel lockte mich ein Irrlicht hin, wie ich einen Ausgang finde, liegt nicht schwer mir in dem Sinn. Liegt nicht schwer mir in dem Sinn.
The Irrlicht's motive of the falling fourth is decorated and finally deformed by the Wanderer's music which follows it. Susan Youens, again writing in the Cambridge Companion, points out the trickery that characterizes the Will-O-The-Wisp in Irrlicht is established at the start in the piano introduction with its consequent at measure 3-4, mocking the falling fourths of measure 1-2. That falling fourth motif is subjected to further mockery in the voice's entry. First, with a dotted rhythm developing into a kind of anti-march figure at measure 5, filtering into a grotesquely leaping figure in measure 6. Then, on its next appearance, turned into a misshapen, diminished fourth. These proceedings constitute a distortion of Schubert's customary practice of echoing the piano's introductory melody in variant form in the voice's first entry. It is as if, in his febrile state, the traveler takes on something of the character of the Irrlicht as he describes its effect on him.
Bin gewohnt, dass ihre Es führt ja jeder Weg zum Ziel. Unsere Freuden, unsere Leiden, alles eines Irrlichtsspiel, alles eines Irrlichtsspiel.
In verse 1, the wanderer follows the Irrlicht into the chasm. He realizes he is being led astray, but claims that he doesn't even care. He's too cool for school. He doesn't follow anyone's rules, not even his own. But, as with many who claim this, the music reveals the opposite is actually true. Likewise, in the second verse, the wanderer attempts to make light of the Irrlicht's game, but the music reveals his very real trepidation. In Retracing a Winter's Journey, Susan Youens describes this as false bravado. The wanderer's first insistence that he doesn't care or mind the Irrlicht's game is bright and confident, leaping up over a tenth in the major median, while the repetition of the final line of verses 1 and 2 is more subdued and in the original tonic minor. In the final verse, Susan Youens notes the contrast drawn by music in the tonic and music which tonicizes the Neapolitan. At the beginning of stanza 3, Schubert lays as heavy and shocking a stress on the new chromatic pitch as he can, in preparation for the fuller revelation of its meaning to come in the following phrase. The contrast between the Neapolitan key in major mode and tonic B minor, a contrast rendered in the strongest cadential terms possible, is a revision of the poetry. Where Müller merely implies an analogy, Schubert states a contrast between rivers that reach the sea, in C major, and sorrows that reach the grave, the wanderer's own B minor sorrows. In the end, the music lapses in defeat back into B minor. When the wanderer reaches upward to G, Auch sein Grab, he attempts the epic vaulting grandeur of the C major streams and tries to assert that he, too, belongs to the greater world of nature, but cannot sustain the effort and slips back to B minor.
Durch des Bergstroms trockner Rinnen wind ich ruhig mich hinab. Jeder Strom wird's mehr gewinnen, jedes Leiden auch sein Grab. Jeder Strom wird's mehr gewinnen, jedes Leiden auch sein Grab.
As the music ends, following this melancholy quasi-cadenza, the Irrlicht is given the final word in the piano's postlude. I hope you enjoyed this analysis of Irrlicht. The next song, number 10, is Rast, or Rest. As always, thank you to my patrons who you can see on the screen now. If you'd like to join my Patreon for any amount, you'll have access to about an hour and 45-minute analysis of Mahler's First Symphony. You can do so at patreon.com/Sonata She Wrote. As always, thank you for joining me.